When Aisha Rahman walked into Cartier's luxurious boutique, sales associate Lauren immediately glanced at the security guard and whispered, "Keep an eye on her. She looks suspicious, probably part of one of those organized theft rings." As Aisha admired the diamond rings in the glass display, Lauren trailed closely behind, noting her every move. When Aisha politely asked, "May I try this one on?" Lauren responded coldly, "These rings are very expensive. Would you like to see the prices first?" The implication was clear: you can't afford them. Staying calm, Aisha smiled and said, "Yes, please show me." Meanwhile, Lauren discreetly texted security, "Activate the alarm system. Stop her when she leaves." What none of them knew was that, upstairs, Cartier's global marketing director was watching everything unfold on the security feed and recognized Aisha instantly, the face of their upcoming million-dollar campaign, scheduled to be signed the very next day. Before the story begins, drop a comment. Which city are you watching from? And if you stand for justice and equality, share this story and subscribe, because together, our voices are stronger. The November afternoon sun cast elegant shadows through Cartier's Fifth Avenue flagship store, illuminating display cases filled with diamonds, emeralds, and precious metals arranged like treasures in a museum. Aisha Rahman paused outside the iconic red doors, adjusting her cream-colored hijab and taking a deep breath before entering. At 26, Aisha had built an empire on authenticity. Her Instagram account, at Modestly Aisha, had grown to 2.4 million followers who admired her elegant fusion of modest Islamic fashion with high-end luxury brands. She'd become one of the most influential voices in the modest fashion movement, proving that religious modesty and runway style weren't mutually exclusive. Her success had caught the attention of major brands eager to tap into the growing Muslim consumer market, worth an estimated $2 trillion globally. Last month, Cartier had approached her with an offer that still made her heart race: a $2 million contract to become the face of their new Global Faces campaign, specifically targeting Middle Eastern and Muslim markets. Tomorrow, she would sign that contract in Cartier's executive offices upstairs. Today, she was here for something personal and strategic: to choose her engagement ring. Her fiancé Tariq had proposed 3 weeks ago, and Cartier wanted to feature their real love story in the campaign. The ring she chose today would be photographed, promoted, and become part of a narrative about modern Muslim women embracing luxury without compromising their values. But as Aisha pushed through the red doors into the hushed luxury of Cartier's showroom, she had no idea that the next 20 minutes would threaten to destroy everything. Lauren Hayes looked up from her desk as the door chimed, her well-trained smile freezing slightly as she took in the new customer, a young woman in a hijab, modest long coat, and flat shoes. Not the typical Cartier clientele that Lauren had come to recognize in her 7 years at the Fifth Avenue location. Lauren's mind immediately began calculating risk factors, a mental checklist she developed through years of working in high-end retail. Unfamiliar face, religious garb that could conceal items, large handbag, alone rather than with the wealthy husband or fiancé who usually paid for such purchases, and most significantly, she didn't look like she belonged in a store where engagement rings started at $15,000 and could easily exceed $200,000. Lauren caught the eye of Michael, the security guard stationed near the door, and gave him a subtle nod. "Watch this one closely." Michael, a retired NYPD officer who'd worked Cartier security for 3 years, understood the signal immediately. He positioned himself with a clear view of the hijabi woman, his hand resting casually near his radio. Aisha was oblivious to the surveillance beginning around her. She moved toward the bridal jewelry section, her eyes drawn to a stunning display of engagement rings, each one a masterpiece of design and craftsmanship. The Love Collection, the Solitaire 1895, the Ballerine. Each ring represented not just jewelry, but Cartier's 175-year legacy of excellence. "May I help you?" Lauren's voice carried professional courtesy, but her body language remained guarded, positioned between Aisha and the most expensive displays. Yes, thank you. Aisha replied with a warm smile, her British accent marking her as educated and well-traveled. I'm looking for an engagement ring. Something classic but distinctive. Lauren's expression didn't soften. Of course, our engagement rings range quite significantly in price. Do you have a budget in mind? The question seemed innocuous but carried subtext. Can you actually afford anything here? Or are you wasting my time? I'm flexible on budget, Aisha said. I'd like to see your signature pieces, particularly from the Solitaire collection. The Solitaire 1895 collection, rings starting at $30,000 and climbing to well over $150,000. Lauren's skepticism deepened. She glanced at Aisha's hands, noting the absence of obviously expensive jewelry, the simple watch, the modest presentation. Those pieces are quite valuable, Lauren said carefully. Perhaps I could show you something from our more accessible collections first? We have beautiful options in the $8,000 to $15,000 range. Aisha felt the familiar sting of being judged and found wanting based on her appearance. She'd experienced it in designer boutiques, luxury hotels, and first-class airport lounges. The automatic assumption that a woman in a hijab couldn't possibly have the wealth or status to belong in elite spaces. I appreciate that, Aisha said, her voice remaining patient. But I specifically came to see the Solitaire collection. May I please view those pieces? Lauren's lips tightened almost imperceptibly. She looked over Aisha's shoulder at Michael and made another subtle gesture, stay alert. Then she reached under her desk and pressed a small button that activated the store's enhanced security protocol, flagging this transaction for additional monitoring. What Lauren didn't know was that every action was being recorded not just by the store's standard security cameras, but by a separate system monitored directly in the executive offices upstairs, a precaution Cartier had implemented after a high-profile theft last year. And in that executive office, Sophie Dubois, Cartier's global marketing director, who'd flown in from Paris specifically for tomorrow's contract signing, happened to glance at the security monitor while preparing her presentation materials. She recognized Aisha immediately. Certainly, Lauren said, her tone suggesting she was humoring a time-waster. She unlocked a display case and removed a stunning solitaire diamond ring, 2.5 carats, platinum setting, priced at $85,000. But instead of offering it to Aisha to try on, she held it in her own hand, turning it to catch the light. This is one of our signature pieces, Lauren said. As you can see, the craftsmanship is exceptional. The price is $85,000, plus tax. She watched Aisha's face carefully, expecting shock or dismay. Instead, Aisha simply nodded with interest. It's beautiful. May I try it on? Lauren hesitated visibly. Before we proceed with trying on pieces in this price range, I need to verify some information. Do you have identification with you? Of course, Aisha said, reaching for her handbag. Lauren's hand moved to her radio instinctively as Aisha opened her large designer bag. A subtle movement, but one caught clearly by the security cameras. Michael tensed, moving slightly closer. Aisha produced her British passport, her driver's license, and her American Express Centurion card, the invitation-only black card that required either massive spending or significant wealth to obtain. Lauren examined the documents with obvious surprise, but her suspicion remained. These could be stolen, fraudulent, or the woman could be shopping for a theft ring, casing the store for a future robbery. Miss Rahman, Lauren said, reading the passport. I'll need to verify this card before we proceed. And I'll need proof of address and income. Proof of address and income? Aisha repeated carefully. Do you require that from all customers who want to try on engagement rings? Lauren's face flushed slightly. We require it from customers making purchases in this price range. Yes. It's standard security protocol. I'm not making a purchase yet, Aisha pointed out. I'm trying on rings to see what I like. Is there a policy that requires financial verification before trying on jewelry? The question hung in the air because both women knew there was no such policy. Lauren was making up requirements based on her assumptions about who Aisha was. Miss Rahman, I don't think you understand how valuable these pieces are, Lauren said, her patience clearly wearing thin. We've had issues with organized theft rings sending in people who don't look like typical jewelry thieves. I'm just being cautious. People who don't look like typical jewelry thieves, Aisha repeated slowly. You mean people who look like me? Muslim women. I didn't say that, Lauren backpedaled. I'm talking about people who come in alone, dressed casually, asking to see expensive items without establishing their purchasing capacity. I'm dressed modestly, not casually, Aisha corrected, her voice remaining calm but carrying steel now. And my purchasing capacity is demonstrated by my Centurion card, which requires either $250,000 annual spending or significant assets. But you've decided I'm suspicious based on my hijab. Lauren's face was fully red now, anger mixing with defensiveness. Ma'am, if you're going to be difficult, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This is private property, and we reserve the right to refuse service. On what grounds? Aisha asked. I've been polite. I've shown identification. I've done nothing suspicious. What specific grounds do you have for refusing service? Michael had moved closer now, his presence clearly intended to intimidate. Miss, the lady asked you to leave. Let's not make this more difficult. Aisha looked between Lauren and Michael, seeing the unified front of assumption and prejudice. She could argue, could make a scene, could demand to speak to a manager. But years of experiencing this kind of discrimination had taught her that fighting in the moment rarely changed anything. I understand, Aisha said quietly, returning her identification to her bag. Thank you for your time. She turned toward the door, dignity intact despite the humiliation, unaware that her departure was being watched with growing horror from the office upstairs. Sophie Dubois had seen everything. She'd watched Lauren's suspicious surveillance from the moment Aisha entered. She'd seen the security protocol activation, the refusal to let Aisha try on rings, the demand for financial verification that was never required of white customers, and finally the forced ejection of the woman who was supposed to sign a $2 million contract tomorrow. Sophie was already moving, her heels clicking sharply on the marble stairs as she raced down from the executive offices. Stop! Sophie's voice cut through the showroom like a whip crack. Nobody moves. Aisha paused at the door, turning back in confusion. Lauren and Michael froze, recognizing the voice of someone very important though they'd never met the Paris executive. Sophie Dubois appeared at the bottom of the stairs, her elegant French suit and obvious authority making it clear she was high-level management. Her face was flushed with anger and exertion. Miss Rahman, Sophie said, slightly breathless, please, don't leave. I am Sophie Dubois, Global Marketing Director. I've been watching what just happened, and I am mortified. She turned to Lauren with barely controlled fury. What is your name? Lauren Hayes, Lauren replied, confusion and growing dread evident on her face. Miss Hayes, do you know who you just ejected from our store? A customer who wouldn't provide proper verification for. That is Aisha Rahman, Sophie interrupted, her French accent thickening with emotion. She has 2.4 million social media followers. She is one of the most influential fashion voices in the Muslim world. And tomorrow morning, she was scheduled to sign a $2 million contract to become the face of Cartier's Global Faces campaign, specifically targeting Muslim and Middle Eastern markets worth over $2 trillion. The color drained from Lauren's face completely. Michael took a step backward, as if physical distance might protect him from the disaster unfolding. She came here today, Sophie continued, her voice sharp with anger, to choose her engagement ring, which would have been featured in our campaign, which would have been photographed for global distribution, which would have generated millions in publicity for this store specifically. Sophie turned back to Aisha, her expression shifting from anger to genuine distress. Miss Rahman, please accept my profound apologies. This is inexcusable. Miss Hayes' behavior does not represent Cartier's values or our commitment to serving all customers with dignity and respect. Aisha stood very still, processing the revelation that her tomorrow's business partner had just watched her be profiled and ejected by their own staff. "Miss Hayes," Sophie said, turning back to the sales associate. "In your 7 years here, have you ever demanded proof of address and income from a white customer before allowing them to try on jewelry?" Lauren's silence was answer enough. "Have you ever activated security protocols based solely on a customer's appearance?" Again, silence. "You profiled Miss Rahman based on her hijab, didn't you? You saw a Muslim woman and assumed she was either poor or a criminal." "I was trying to protect the store," Lauren began. "You were discriminating," Sophie cut her off coldly. "And you did it on camera, with clear audio, creating legal liability for Cartier and potentially destroying a multi-million-dollar marketing partnership." She pulled out her phone and made a call. "Security office? This is Sophie Dubois. I need the last 30 minutes of footage from the main showroom, sent to legal immediately." "Yes, all angles. Mark it as priority 1 discrimination incident." Hanging up, she addressed Lauren again. "You're terminated effective immediately. Collect your personal items and leave the premises. HR will contact you regarding your final paycheck and the legal implications of your actions." Lauren's face crumpled. "Please, Ms. Dubois, I've been here 7 years. I have excellent sales records. I was just being careful." "You were being racist," Sophie said bluntly. "And your careful discrimination just cost us immeasurably in reputation, customer relations, and potential legal damages. Leave now before security escorts you out." As Lauren stumbled toward her desk to gather her belongings, Sophie turned to Michael. "And you, sir? When you saw a customer being treated this way, you chose to intimidate rather than intervene. That speaks to a cultural problem we'll be addressing immediately." She looked at Aisha, who'd remained silent through the confrontation, her face unreadable. "Miss Rahman, I cannot apologize enough. Would you be willing to sit down with me, perhaps in our executive lounge? I'd like to discuss how we can make this right." Aisha considered for a moment, seeing Lauren's tearful exit from the corner of her eye, seeing Michael's chastened posture. "Ms. Dubois, I appreciate your swift action, but I need to know, is tomorrow's contract contingent on me accepting your apology? Because I won't be pressured into pretending this didn't happen." "Absolutely not," Sophie said firmly. "Whether you sign tomorrow, whether you walk away from this partnership entirely, or whether you sue us for discrimination, those are all your choices to make. What just happened was wrong, period. My response isn't about protecting the contract. It's about protecting every customer who shouldn't have to face what you just faced." Aisha studied Sophie's face, seeing genuine remorse rather than corporate damage control. "Okay, let's talk." In the executive lounge, over tea that Aisha barely touched, Sophie outlined immediate actions. Lauren's termination, mandatory bias training for all staff, implementation of anonymous customer feedback systems specifically asking about discrimination, and regular audits of customer service interactions. "But that's not enough," Sophie said, leaning forward. "I want to know, what would make you feel safe shopping here? What would make other Muslim women feel safe? Because if we're going to represent your community in our marketing, we damn well better be serving them properly in our stores." Aisha was quiet for a moment. Representation isn't just in advertisements. It's in hiring. Do you have any Muslim employees in customer-facing roles? Any staff who understand that hijab isn't suspicious, that modest dress isn't poverty? Sophie's face showed she knew the answer. "No, we don't." "Then that's where real change starts. Not just training people to tolerate us, but actually including us in your workforce, your decision-making, your entire culture." The next morning, Aisha did sign the contract. But she also negotiated an additional clause. Cartier would implement a comprehensive diversity initiative in hiring, promotion, and vendor selection, specifically focusing on Muslim and Middle Eastern representation. The contract included provisions for regular reporting on these metrics, with Aisha's continued partnership contingent on demonstrated progress. 3 months later, Cartier's Fifth Avenue store had 3 Muslim employees, including one in management. The security protocols had been completely overhauled to prevent profiling. And the viral video of Lauren's discrimination, released by Aisha with Cartier's consent, became a training tool across the luxury retail industry. Lauren's firing became a case study in how assumptions destroy careers. Aisha's patience and strategic thinking became a blueprint for demanding systematic change rather than just individual punishment. And one afternoon in a jewelry store became the catalyst that forced an entire industry to confront how it treated customers who didn't fit their narrow vision of who deserved luxury. Sometimes justice requires more than firing one bigoted employee. Sometimes it requires using your power and platform to ensure the next person who looks like you doesn't have to prove their humanity before being treated with basic respect.